All right, well, welcome to the first of a 5-week series called Why Jesus. We're going to be looking at what it is that Jesus has, both for us personally and for our world. And before I get to that, I just want to take a moment to say hello to those who are watching online. Would you help me welcome the substantial number of people that watch us every Sunday? We're glad that you joined us. And as I say that, I also just want to, again, point you to the fact that this is a primary time for you to invite people to church. In the next several weeks, and particularly on Easter, this is the time of year. All kinds of studies tell us this is the time of year. People are more likely to say yes to you if you invite them to church than to say no, and particularly for Easter. People are very often who aren't connected to church or religion at all, they want to come and be a part of that. And so I want to encourage you, start praying about who you're going to invite here, and then invite someone. Maybe it's a neighbor or a classmate. Maybe it's somebody in your family who's told you no time and time again. This is a time when they're likely to say yes. We have invitation cards out there in our lobby, tools for you to invite people here. I want to encourage you to do that. Also, before I get to the message today, I just want to point out that we had our annual business meeting last week, and you can learn more about what happened there. We found some board members who are willing to serve for 3 years. Also, as a church, we approved the financing for building out the rest of the community center across the way. And I'm really excited about that. That's going to be start happening in the summer. You'll start to see movement on that building, and perhaps in the early fall. And so I want you to recognize it's a big project, 36,000 square feet, so it's going to take a while. But every time that you pass it and you see activity there, or you wonder why it hasn't happened yet, I want to ask you to do something, and that is I want to ask you to pray. Pray that God will bless that place. Pray that in the very first month that it's open, that will be a place where people receive ministry and they receive Jesus Christ. I think that kind of outreach, it's gonna have dividends for us for many years to come, and I'm excited about it. I just want you to know that's moving ahead. Also, after this service, as was mentioned, there'll be a meeting about a West Side campus starting this fall. And I want you to know that's about reaching people. It's about 2/3 of the community in West Lafayette that is unchurched. And so because there is that kind of need there, that's why we're interested in planting a second campus there. And we'll be one church with that group over there. But I just want you to be aware that's happening. And you can find out more information about it after this service up in the loft. During this series that we're starting, as I said, I'm going to be talking to you about Jesus, about some of his traits. And as we get ready to start today's message, I just want to encourage you, go ahead and pull out your message notes that are in the back of your bulletin, or maybe you're looking at them on an app like YouVersion or our church app. Go ahead and pull that out, get that ready. And what we're going to start with today about Jesus and about why we needed Jesus, we're going to start with the fact that Jesus is the faithful friend. Jesus is the faithful friend. He wants to relate to you personally. Now, I'm a big fan of nicknames. I've always been this way. I can remember summer between 4th and 5th grade, I went to camp, and they tagged me with the nickname Tank. I was so excited. I just loved it. I finally had a nickname. And I went home and I asked everybody to call me Tank, and nobody did. I was still Robby. Oh well. But then when I went to college, everybody in my dorm floor there, everyone had a nickname, right? So my roommate's nickname was Slingshot. Now I was just Robby B, but the guy that was in the suite with my suite mate, his name was Rico Suave. I like that. Maybe you know a Rico here. Yeah. Well, I can remember we had another guy. There were roommates on our floor. they were named after appliances. So one was the refrigerator and the other was the toaster. It's true. And we had a man named Green Jeans. Somebody else we called Shorty, and he liked it. Okay, if you're not tall, I'm sorry, but he liked it. And the thing is, you know, men do this. We come up with nicknames for people. Women don't do it. It's like women get together with Julie and Linda and Sue and so on. They're like calling each other by their name. They're not like, hey, what's up, fatty? How's it going? And then women don't do that. I understand it. But the thing is, this happens in sports too, right? In baseball. You ever been at the Little League game or at the high school game and somebody comes to the plate? Everybody gets E added onto their name. So it's like, hey, Smithy, Johnny, Jimmy, hey. You know, this kind of thing happens. And why is it that happens? It's because a nickname, it has a way of drawing you closer to somebody. Sometimes a nickname describes the relationship better than the actual given name of that person. And did you know that the Son of God, he had nicknames? He was given names so that we would draw closer to him and we would understand what our relationship was to him. I want to show them just a few. Of course, the first is one that you likely know, and that is Jesus. He was given the name Jesus at his birth because he will save his people from their sins. This name means God saves. That's what Jesus means. And it was a very common name in the days of Jesus. In fact, in some cultures, this is still a common name. Just a couple months ago, I was at a restaurant with my friend. It was a Mexican restaurant. And our server comes up, and he's got on his name tag, and it's Jesus, Jesus. And I was like, wow, you know, and I kind of asked him about that a little bit. And then every time he came to bring me something, I'd be like, thank you, Jesus. And he laughed, and it was cool. But the thing is, Jesus, he's got multiple nicknames. Just a couple verses after this, in Matthew 1:23, we find another nickname for Jesus. They will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So there's a sense with Jesus that he was bringing God close to people. And in fact, Jesus promises never to leave us. He's always our Emmanuel. And for some of you here today, I have no doubt, you've never discovered what this means or how it is that Jesus is God with you. It's one of his nicknames because this is one of the ways we experience Jesus. When Jesus is near, God is near. Or how about another name that you might know, or a nickname that you might know about Jesus? It's this one. It's found in John chapter 1. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Jesus was called the Word. Why is that? It's because, you know, we had the Word written out on parchment, chiseled into stone, and maybe etched into clay. The Word of God was recorded in that way, but Jesus comes as the living Word of God. Jesus comes and he is God's thought toward us embodied in a person. And so they called him the Word. And I want to tell you that what else this says here about Jesus making his dwelling among us, this is particularly important for you and me to grasp. Because what we need to understand is that Jesus, he spent 33 years in his earthly life. But only three of his 33 years were spent doing miracles and preaching on hillsides. 30 years for Jesus is found in Jesus making his dwelling among us. Jesus just doing life. And he was doing what theologians call identification. And that is to say, Jesus, by going through all the things that we go through in this life, he was identifying with us so that he could understand us better. So that, in essence, he could become a better friend to us. Look at what Hebrews in the New Testament says about this. It says that's why he had to enter into every detail of human life. Then, when he came before God as high priest, I'll talk about this a little bit later, to get rid of the people's sins, he would have already experienced it all himself, all the pain, all the testing, and would be able to help where help was needed. Jesus went through the things that he went through, not just so that he could understand, but so that he could help. He could help. He wanted to make sure that when you prayed and you were going through the same kinds of things that he went through on earth, he wanted to make sure he could understand. And so many people don't see him that way. So many people, they think about Jesus as someone who's distant, on a throne off in heaven somewhere. Or Jesus, he's dying on a cross, and that's kind of all we think about when we think about Jesus. But I want you to know him today as a friend. Don't just see him as a part of history or of the spiritual, some cosmic spirituality. Don't think of him just in terms of what he's done in the past, but I want you to think about Jesus as your friend right now. Because here's what's true. If you're ever going to sympathize with or comfort someone who's gone through something difficult, it helps a lot if you've been through that. Right? In fact, your ability to help someone who has gone through something hard is limited by your own experience. I can remember when I first came back to live in America with my family after we'd lived in Europe, basically as immigrants for several years. I can remember when we arrived back, we moved into an apartment complex on the west side of Indianapolis that was filled with immigrants. And I can remember thinking that before I left and I was an immigrant myself, I would have been very uncomfortable in that situation. But somehow being surrounded by these people who had broken English and who were trying to figure out what it means to live in America, somehow, like, I loved them more. Somehow I felt more comfortable with them, and I was put at ease by them because I'd gone through that experience myself of moving with my family to another country and learning a new language and learning all the systems about how things work and spending hours just searching for items in the grocery store. I knew what that was like. And so when I got to know these people, my neighbors, I immediately felt a connection with them. You know, I can remember when my father died. Over 10 years ago now, 11 years ago this year. And I can remember that experience made me a better pastor. Because I could then relate better to what people were going through when they lost someone close to them through death. Or like when my wife a few years ago went through cancer and went through all these surgeries and the recovery and the medication and everything she went through. Before that, my capacity to understand what people were going through with cancer and what their families were going through, it was limited. But then because I had that experience, I could understand so much better. And what I'm saying to you about Jesus is there's nothing in life that you're going to go through that Jesus doesn't understand. Jesus went through this life. He understands. And in particular, I want to talk to you about three things he understands. The first is this. Jesus understands relationships. He understands relationships. Why do I say that? Because he had a family. Look at Mark chapter 6, verse 3. Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son? And look, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. It's the only place where Jesus' brothers are named. Aren't his sisters here with us? Jesus had at least 2 sisters. He had 4 brothers. He had 6 siblings, 7 kids in the house. Somebody got duct taped to a chair in that house. I just know it. You got that many kids, there's going to be some struggle. Got that many kids, there's going to be some yelling and some tension from time to time. There's going to be jealousy and envy and anger, all the things you go through growing up in a family. Jesus had the dynamic of a family. And can you imagine if you lived with Jesus? You'd be like, he did it to me again. He wasn't even there, and he told what I did. How did that happen? Jesus had the dynamic of a family. And you know what else he understands? He knows what it's like to be single. He was tempted at all points, the Bible says. He knows what it's like to be attracted to the opposite sex. He knows what it's like to be single. And you might say, well, he doesn't know what it's like to be married. He can't identify with me. Well, are you so sure? I mean, the Bible describes Jesus as the groom and the church as the bride. And so Jesus knows what it's like to be let down by people that he should be able to count on. Jesus knows what it's like to experience unfaithfulness of those he loves. He experiences that every day. You know, he knows what it's like to have friends betray him. Peter, this good friend of Jesus, he would lead the church, Peter. Talked about him a couple weeks ago. When Jesus needed him most, when Jesus was on trial for his life, Peter was standing just yards away outside the house where Jesus was on trial. And he was warming himself near a fire. And people were coming to him and saying, you were with him. And this is what Peter said, I don't know who he is. Can you imagine at his critical hour? He knows what it's like to be let down by his friends. Why is that there? Because he wanted to understand what we go through. The Bible even describes that his natural brothers and sisters thought that he was crazy. They heard the things that he was teaching. In this case, he's casting out a demon. He's speaking to devils. And this is what it says in Mark chapter 3, verse 21. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he's out of his mind. It's like they walked in front of everybody. They're like, come with us, Jesus. Sorry, everybody. He didn't get enough sleep. He sometimes does this. We're sorry. And they try and usher him out. Can you imagine? I mean, the one group of people that you should be able to count on should be your family. And Jesus' family at a certain point wasn't believing in him. There's no detail of a relationship Jesus doesn't understand. Something else he understands life. He understands life. Jesus, being a boy in the ancient world where he lived, boys started working in their trade at 12 years old. And so Jesus spent 18 years as a carpenter. He only spent 3 years preaching. He spent 18 years as a carpenter. And so Jesus couldn't have been scrawny and soft, by the way, like our movies and paintings tell us that he's all skinny and pale and he's about ready to fall apart. He couldn't have been that way because he'd been a carpenter. And the word for carpenter, by the way, in the New Testament means somebody who works with stone and wood. So he had to have some beef, you know? He didn't have a nail gun. Boom, boom, boom. There's no effort to that. He's pounding in his nails. And he wouldn't have had a saw to cut his stuff. No power tools in the ancient world. So he was working at that for 18 years. He knew what it was like to get up and not feel like he wanted to go to work. He had to deal with upset customers. He had to deal with people who didn't want to pay him. He had to deal with people who came in and said, you know what, that's not right, make it over again. He had to pay taxes. Why is this? Because just as important as his preaching and teaching and his miracles is the fact that Jesus was a man. He had blisters and calluses. Look how Hebrews talks about it again. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Jesus, he went through this life. Jesus knows the strain of this life. He understands what it feels like to be you and me. And why am I wanting to convince you of this? Because here's what I think. If you believe that he really understands, you'll relate to him differently. You'll pray to him differently. You'll treat Jesus differently. Too many of us, we approach Jesus like he is way far off. Like he's just this golden figure that doesn't look to us very closely at all. And I'm saying to you, he went through your life and my life so that he could be close to us. Something else Jesus understands pain. He understands pain. Some of you are here today in pain. Not just physical pain, but you're maybe experiencing emotional pain today. Jesus understands it. What does Isaiah say in the Old Testament? He says, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. You can get the impression that everybody must have liked Jesus, except for the people who killed him. But it's not really what the scriptures indicate. And in fact, if you think about Jesus, it was likely true of him that when he was a boy on the playground, some very unkind things were said to him. Like he doesn't know who his real daddy is. You know what he is? He's one of those. Jesus, before he was ever crucified, he knew what it was like to experience sorrow and suffering and to be rejected and despised. He understands pain. And this helped me a lot when I was particularly a new Christian. Because as I was going through elementary school and then junior high, what I found was that I was bullied a great deal. And so when I came to Jesus, one of the first things that helped me the most and made me so much stronger was to realize that Jesus could relate to being marginalized by other people. Now, that's just the emotion I'm talking about. He also experienced the most horrific kind of death at the cross. He experienced every kind of pain, the worst of it all. And here's what I'm saying to you. He understands. The Bible says it like this. It says that he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds, we are healed. You see the pain that he went through. He understands. He's been through that. But look, he's not hopeless or helpless in the face of our pain. He's gone through it, and he has the power to heal us. He has the power to make weak people strong. I'm glad Jesus is my friend, and he went through all this to identify with us. Jesus talks about it further in his own life. Luke chapter 9, he says the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things. He will be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. Jesus is someone who understands what it means to be marginalized. He understands what it means to be weak. He understands what it means to not have the privileges of other people. And I just say this. Jesus, because he understands, he is the answer for our world. I don't know if you see what I see. I suspect you do. It feels like our world needs Jesus more than it ever has. It feels like our culture and our society is pulled in such incredible ways, like it's all just going to break any moment. And almost all of the problems that we have, I want to talk about a few of them, but almost all the problems we have, they're related to someone not understanding somebody else. Right now in our political situation here in America, two sides of the divide, they don't understand each other. They're talking past each other. Two sides of the divide, they just hate each other. They've even developed their own networks so they can just watch people who talk about the things they believe. That's really where it is. And it's in such a state that the government seemingly can't accomplish the very important things it should accomplish. And they keep digging a deeper and deeper debt until you wonder, will this country just one day go broke and dissolve? How does that problem get fixed? It's when we start to yield to someone who decided to understand what someone else was going through. I think about racism in this country. You think that maybe like we could solve that problem. All the things that we've been through here in America. And yet we find ourselves still divided. We find, if you listen to black people talk about racism, you listen to white people talk about racism, it's like they're talking about two different countries. And so like there's this profound misunderstanding of the other person. And what am I saying to you? Jesus understands. Jesus is the answer to a problem that is that deep. You start to yield your life to somebody who came so that he could understand you, it should start to change the way you relate to other people too. Another problem that I think of here in America that I'm certain Jesus is the answer to is this immigration situation. Because there again, it seems like people on both sides of that issue they're not understanding each other. There is a profound amount of opinion without much understanding of what somebody else is going through. And I can just say, I would just say this, you know what? I got to congratulate this church. This church has done a great job in welcoming people here from other places. I think we have about 40 nationalities here. And I just want to say we're glad that every single one of you is here. Because Jesus brings us together. Jesus bridges the divide. Jesus is the one who's the answer to all the problems that we have here. And I'll just say this so that you understand why I'm talking about this. It's because I have had a fairly good number of people come to me who are immigrants to America, right in our church. And with tears coming down their face, they are afraid that somehow their life is going to be pulled apart any moment by powers that none of us can control. What's the answer? Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the one who took the time to understand. He took the time to feel what we feel. When I think about this situation in our country with these mass shootings that have happened, every year it gets worse. The number of events goes up. The number of people who die is going up. And almost every time, who's at the center of it? Who's the one pulling the trigger? It's someone who was marginalized. It's someone who's not been felt like they were understood. It's someone who has mental problems. But yes, maybe they have those problems because they never felt accepted by anyone else. And what I'm saying to you is, even with a problem like that, it will not be fixed through any law Washington, D.C. can fix. This is a sickness in the heart of our society. And the only thing that's going to fix it is Jesus. It'd be great to change some laws. But what also has to happen is the hearts of people have to be touched by the love of God in Jesus. And you know what? When we look at these problems, these things I'm talking about, you may feel like they are intractable problems that can never be solved. And let me just say to you, you're wrong. You're wrong. We've got the answer in our lives. Jesus is in our hearts. Jesus understands. And here's what I want you to know. If anyone qualifies to be your best friend, it's Jesus. If there was ever anyone who could come alongside you and let you know he understands, it's Jesus. Look how the Bible talks about Jesus. In Proverbs, it says that a man of many companions may come to ruin. A lot of friends are not the answer in your life. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. One of the traits that I love most about Jesus is that he is my faithful friend. And I just want to convey a couple of things here as I close this message about what you need to do to take up friendship with him. The first thing you need to do to take up friendship with Jesus, this faithful friend, is relate to Jesus as your friend. Relate to Jesus as your friend. Some of you need to change your relationship status with Jesus. You need to become absolutely committed to him first. More than anything else that you want in your life, you ought to want him. You need to know that you love him and you spend time with him every day. I want you to know he doesn't want to be your Sunday God. He wants to be your best friend. And many of you think that when I talk about Jesus as a friend, that I'm saying something that's not quite right. You're just not comfortable in thinking about Jesus like that. But this is the way that Jesus spoke. Look at John 15:15. Jesus said to his disciples, they were following him. He said, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. They were his friends. We are the friends of Jesus. He's already got servants. He's got thousands of angels serving him. So how is it, if Jesus has gone to the trouble of identifying with you, how is it that you can identify with Jesus? You know, sometimes girls, to identify each other as their friend, they might share a piece of jewelry or like have two halves of the same piece of jewelry, and they'll say, this is my best friend's whatever. and boys sometimes, you know, they'll like cut their thumb open with a thorn or something, and they'll put their thumbs together and they'll say, we're blood brothers now. We share blood. We're identifying with each other. Well, how does that work in Christianity? How does it work with Jesus? How do you make him your best friend? You identify with him through baptism. Baptism. That's why we're baptizing people today after this service. It's because baptism is a way for you to identify with the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's what that water means. It's a water grave that you go down into, and then you're raised up to a new life. That's what baptism is. It's a way for you to identify with Jesus as your friend. Here's the second thing you can do to take on friendship with Jesus. Pray to him, talk to him with confidence. If he understands relationships and life and work and pain, then you ought to talk to him with confidence, even when you're feeling down, even like when you feel like your faith is melting away. I want to say this to you. You know what? If you spend your time praying a lot formally, a lot of these, thous, ye's, and yows, stop it. Start talking to him by having a conversation with God all day long. You know, my teenage sons, they have these, and our life is never the same. And they are texting all the time with a group of friends. They're in this like group chat. And I remember one day I was sitting at a meal with them, and both of their phones go off at the same time. They pick it up, and they start typing away. And I was like, "Hey, what was on there? And they were like, oh, so-and-so just said, hey. And so I was like, okay, well, it's like, what did you say? I said, hey. What's going on there? That's the rhythm of relationships today, right? What's going on there is that they're letting their friends know, hey, I'm thinking about you. Hey, you're on your mind. Hey, I care about you. And I just want to say to you, that's the way that your relationship with Jesus ought to develop. You ought to start, I don't have an app for you for your phone to text to Jesus. He texts back. That would be really cool. But you got to start having the kind of relationship where throughout the day, you're just looking up and you're saying, hey. And where he can say, what's wrong? And you can say, work. And he can say, what's wrong? And you can say, I don't want to go tomorrow. You got to have a relationship with him where like you can start to like have a regular interaction with him. That's the way that friends work out. You know why? You know why you need to talk to him like that? Because Jesus, the Bible says Jesus is talking to his Father about you. He's the high priest. And he's looking at your life and he's being like, Father, did you see that? I went through that. That's hard. Give him some help, Dad. And he's looking at his father and he's saying, see, Father, see how you just gave into that temptation? I know what that's like. That's a tough one. Remember, we covered it with the cross. See what he's going through? Let's help him through this. This is how the Bible talks about it. It says, let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You start talking to Jesus like he's your friend. You start talking to him with confidence about what it is that's going on in your life, even if it's disappointing. What are you going to receive? 3 things. You're going to find mercy. So you're not going to receive the kind of punishment that you thought you should receive for your mistakes. You're going to receive grace. In other words, God's going to give you more than you expected. And you're going to receive help from God. But you got to start talking to him. So start treating him as a friend. Start praying to him in confidence. And the third thing is trust Jesus with your life. Trust Jesus with your life. You know, the thing is, if Jesus is going to, if he's going to matter, if he's going to be a difference maker for you, if he's going to matter in your family and in like your everyday life, then you got to start trusting him with everything. You got to start trusting him in the things that you're worried about. You got to start trusting him with your kids. You got to start trusting him when things don't go right. And you got to trust him when things go really well. And do you know how he responds to that kind of trust? John 1 says it like this. To all who received him, he gave the right to become children of God. All they needed to do was to trust him to save them. Trust Jesus with your life. He's your faithful friend. Will you bow your head with me and just close your eyes right where you are? You know, we've learned it, we've studied it, now we need to apply it.